Hello, everyone. My name is Maurice Russell of Media Rights Management. Today, our panel is The Future Foretold. When I initially heard that title, I thought, oh, we're going to have a crystal ball up here and just tell everybody what's going to happen in the future. We don't have that, but we do have a panel of three very distinguished experts to help us navigate. So a stat, according to the RIAA, recorded music revenue in 2017 was $8.7 billion, up 16.5%. That took a while, didn't it? And it's the first time since 2008 that we've had 2 years of substantial increases in the industry. So we're going to look at the market trends, the key drivers, including the formats, the players, and the technologies. But first, I'm going to let each of our panelists give a brief introduction, and then we're going to dive right in. So, Russ, let's start with you.
Sure. My name is Russ Krupnick. I run a research firm called Music Watch. I've been involved in looking at consumer insights for entertainment for about 20 years. And I guess when I wake up and think about what my mission is, it's using research to really be the voice of the music fan and music consumer back to the industry.
David?
Sounds good. Hi. Thanks, everybody. Nice to see you here today. My name is David Card. I'm an analyst with Media Research, media with an I, which is a boutique firm that focuses on music, streaming video, and gaming based in London. Does a lot of consumer surveys, so if I quote any numbers at you, they'll probably come from some of those surveys. And I've been in the industry watching technology and music and consumer behavior for 25 plus years or so with companies like Jupiter Research. Anybody remember Jupiter from the Internet 1.0? Yeah. Built and killed a $100 million company there. That was a fun ride. Jupiter, Forrester, IDC, Media. I also work on a company that focuses on local technology called Street Fight. So that's my background.
John?
I am John Murphy. I lead the publishing and PRO practice at Nielsen Music. And if anyone is not familiar with Nielsen Music, we're the most comprehensive service in terms of tracking music consumption and industry trends in the business. So I'm very excited to be here and share my knowledge of the industry with you, fine people.
And again, I'm Maurice Russell, CEO and founder of Media Rights Management. My company provides rights management consulting services to media and music companies. Many of you may know me from my prior role at the Harry Fox Agency, where I oversaw client services and licensing. So back to those stats, the $8.7 billion number from 2017 and the 16.5% growth. Much of that was streaming, which now comprises about 2/3 of the market. So let's start with that. Gentlemen, what is driving the growth of streaming?
I think since I was back in the day, Internet 1.0, making those forecasts that used to say that streaming was going to take over the world, we were probably 4 or 5 years early, I think, in some of our forecasting. It really took mobile to get it started. But we went through that initial phase where streaming was the celestial jukebox, and it was a great product for music aficionados, for people who were digitally savvy, liked a lot of genres, and were already spending on music. They were buying, multiple albums a year back in the day when people still bought albums. So that was the first phase, and then the second phase was when mobile kicked in, and that brought in a lot of younger users into the subscription business. So Spotify took off, and in fact is setting the stage these days. So we're about to go into that third stage because there's we'll probably get into this, but there's some suspicion that a $10 a month product might be pretty saturated in the countries where it's been rolled out first, in European countries and in the US, and it's blowing up in Japan too. So we're going into that third stage, and I think one of the things we'll have to figure out is what's going to keep it going? Is it going to be new price points? Is it going to be new feature sets? Is there something else you can add to streaming to make it a more mass market kind of approach? About 30 or 40% of Americans listen to streaming, and that's not paying for it. That's with the largely with the free base, but that might be the max. But there's certainly growth in emerging markets and different audiences.
I think there's also been a cultural change. If we were here 10 years ago, talking 10, 15 years ago, we'd be talking about music wants to be free. Remember that whole conversation back in the not so far day? And I think what's happened culturally, especially with millennials, is there's this payment or subscription ethos that's taking in. There's an on-demand ethos that's taken over the, I'll steal things or I expect it to be free. And it's, you see it with Amazon Prime, you see it with Netflix and Hulu, and now you see those same consumers saying, I want on-demand and I'm willing to pay for it, migrating to Spotify or Apple or Amazon or whatever flavor. And I agree with David. We'll talk about the technology later because there are some real lubricants from a technology side as well.
Yeah, and just to follow on, not to belabor the rise of technology impacting all of this, but the DSPs have pretty much made an easy button for music listening. In our research, any given year, 80 to 90% of the population is saying that I'm a music listener, whether it's a passive or an active music listener, but they haven't had the technology to really harness that. So the casual music listener is now empowered by these algorithms that are generating playlists based on their selections, their history of listening. So all of a sudden they have this interesting new way of active passive listening, if you will. So I think the DSP has done a really good job, but just the accessibility, the ease, the on-the-go pervasiveness of it, I think is really what's driving the needle.
So when you look at the market, who's winning in streaming? And who's winning now may be very different than who is winning a few years down the road. What are your views on that?
Well, I think we all can sort of see Spotify at the top with, by the end of this year could have 90 plus million subscribers. With Apple, emerging low distribution costs, practically free distribution costs or cost of customer acquisition, with about half of that maybe in terms of subscribers, and Amazon coming up on the outside, about half the size of Apple maybe, and then you wonder, how Pandora will evolve. We saw some movement this morning on that one. And then you wonder how serious YouTube is going to take the subscription business. I feel like they did it to make the labels happy, because there's such a huge player, or try to make them happy, because there's such a huge player in the free space. But fundamentally, both Google and Facebook, should they enter, they're really ad-supported businesses, and I'm not sure that subscriptions are in the core of their being. Even though you could argue that the YouTube service might be the most richly featured. It has a lot of social technologies integrated into it that the other guys haven't done yet. You got different takes, or see any outsiders coming in?
I would actually, if you think about outsiders, one company that I look at is Tencent in China, and we may get to this as well, but we tend to think very locally about these services, and locally I mean U.S. and Europe. But if you take a look at China, I saw a number that Tencent has more listeners in China to their music service, I think, and don't quote me on this, in a week that Spotify either has in the U.S. in a year or a month or something. It's some phenomenal ratio. So I'd watch out for them as well.
The other thing is that media research is a big fan of, particularly in Eastern regions, in products and services that are distributed through messaging rather than some other sort of core hub app. So some of the messaging players in Tencent is a kind of an example of that as well. I suppose we could see the phone companies at least doing distribution deals as they have in the past, and Deezer kind of got started in Europe with phone company deals. So Tencent's definitely one to keep your eye on for sure.
What about the breakdown in streaming between audio only and audio visual? How important is audio visual now, and where do you see it going?
I think there'll come a time when we'll be surprised that we even thought about that question, because my guess is that all of the major services will probably integrate video at some point. I mean, you could even think about you could think of even about digital audio for your favorite AM/FM station, starting to have video. So I think video, just like John talked about playlists, I think video is going to be a core component of this. Obviously, you won't until we have all driverless cars and so on. You won't be. Hopefully, you won't be listening to watching videos in your car while you drive. But I think it'll be available.
That'd be my flip side argument. Would be there's a lot more opportunities, use cases, as the nerds would say, for audio only, and it's questionable actually. How much YouTube usage is just banging on it to hear the song rather than actually leaning forward and watching the video as well. So.
I think it's about. We have numbers on that. I think it's about a third of people are just using YouTube the same way that they use Spotify.
Yeah.
They use it as an audio-only service. But David's right that there are places where it's an audio experience, and locations where it's a multimedia experience.
Now, to temper that, I do think that it's going to continue to be a young crowd for videos. Mm-hmm. We're seeing, the trending on audio outpacing video streaming pretty significantly, even year to date. So I think it's still going to be an important component for music discovery with the YouTube services, things on Facebook, things like that. But where I see it going is more the augmented reality, virtual reality experiences in terms of the video component of it, as opposed to just watching music videos on YouTube.
And some of the new opportunities for these innovative services with bringing in music into another experience. I would agree with the VR, AR kind of a thing. A lot of the lip syncing video, send a clip to your friend and sing along. Feel like that could be one of the places where new growth could come from, and new audiences and new distribution channels, and maybe even new players, and certainly new revenue streams. But that wouldn't be the professional quality video in most cases, right? That'd be user-created video bonded with professional music.
Let's talk a little bit about streaming models, specifically the freemium model, which was very controversial with rights holders for a long time. Is it working, and do you see it continuing?
The conversion rate on paid services, starting off with thinking about satellite radio, which you usually get with a new car, and has a high, like 60% conversion rate to payment. The freemium music isn't that high, but it is successful for Spotify. And Spotify has also been rolling out these super trials where you pay $1 for 3 months of subscription, which is another pretty successful model for upgrading. So freemium might be controversial because it pays less revenues, but you've also got the streaming companies beefing up their advertising efforts as well. So we heard about Pandora this morning, and I think Facebook will be aggressive in that space too.
Do any of you have any numbers on conversion rates?
I know on the trials, it's roughly about 1 in 4. I don't know whether they're necessarily sticking, but I think if you take a free trial, at least on consumer surveys, in which I'm skeptical because people tend to overstate things a little bit. But
a little bit, yeah.
One out of 5, 1 out of 4, something like that. And just to add to David's point is, I think we also have to recognize there is a place in a consumer for I don't like the term free, but ad-supported, whether that's AM/FM radio, right, or whether that's something like Pandora ad-supported or Spotify. There's a large consumer set who may not I don't want to say never, but may not be really ready to convert to a $9.99 or a $5.99 service.
Yeah, we used to see back in the old days that one thing about free trials is they convert about 6 times higher than something that didn't use a free trial. So it's a good customer acquisition strategy if you can afford it.
And looking at slightly different, not necessarily conversion, but percent of population that's paying for streaming. Our big study we do every year, Music 360, our consumers are telling us, our listeners are telling us that around 30% of the general population is paying for a streaming service. If you look at millennials, though, that number jumps up to 45%. So, that tells you the future right there, that the more, the bigger appetite to spend money on a subscription is with the millennials, is going to follow with the teens, things like that. So I think the freemium is great for exposure and getting, generating awareness, just, promotional marketing campaign, but I think the younger generations will continue to adopt more of a pay-for mentality, and they're used to paying for it as opposed to, even my generation when I was downloading stuff at Napster in college before I'd go out at night, I wasn't used to paying for music until just recently, so.
And how much are people sticking with services once they do get a subscription? How do churn rate numbers get reflected?
Spotify isn't doing too badly on that. Its quarterly churn rate is about 5%, which translates out to about 18% a year, which means that it still has to, in order to grow, it has to have twice as many, one extra for every person who sticks. They're going to have another one that's shifting over. So they have to spend money as if they were 2x what a normal growth, what a normal cost of acquisition would be. So, but that's not a bad churn rate. That's a pretty good stick. But it also means it takes them 12, 13, 14 months to recapture the cost of their acquisition usually. So Spotify, it's fascinating because they're the biggest and everybody knows who they are. I know we're not all New Yorkers, but the ads are all over the subways these days, and so they're actually sort of reaching out in a kind of a public way that they didn't before they went public. But they're still losing money, and I used to say they don't have a sustainable business model. There's the cost of, they need to bring down customer acquisition costs because royalties are never going to go down, much as we're all suffering through royalties being less than they were in the physical world. But so I guess it's a tough call, but it seems like Spotify is growing. But I suspect you'll see them. There'll be other things that Spotify will be exposing you to as a service in addition to music as the years go on.
Right.
One thing we didn't discuss, but your comment raises the issue. Notwithstanding the fact that Spotify has obviously raised money recently, can that be a sustainable business model as a standalone subscription streaming service?
Somebody else want to kick in, jump in?
I guess it's more of an opinion question.
Yeah, because it's if you look at the other potential players, right, or the other players. So Apple is in fact more serious about subscription revenues than they used to be. It used to be Apple's services business was basically a means to sell iPhones, and that they're investing more in it. They're buying content. They're doing exclusives. So but they could still position it as a loss leader. And Amazon is a puzzlement to me because, retail margins are terrible, and they're making money off of AWS. Their cloud computer services is paying for a lot of stuff there. But retail is profitable for them, so they might look at a music subscription service model. They could look at it as a loss leader, or they could look at it as as part of their big Prime package because their Prime users buy more of everything from them. But on the other hand, they might appreciate the fact that it, living with retail margins is something they can do. I don't know about Spotify. I mean, their losses historically have been getting a little bit less, but not much yet. I don't know.
Any other opinions?
I'm gonna stay away from that one.
No, well, I mean, we spoke about it earlier, Maurice, and I think the one hope for me, expectation is that the Spotify that we know today isn't the Spotify that we'll know tomorrow. I think it's going to be much more of, there'll be podcasts, there'll be audiobooks, there'll be video. They'll be able to raise, not for everyone. I mean, there'll be a low-tier customer, but you'll also have a higher-tier customer who's going to pay either in specific payments or a higher monthly fee to get that premium or enhanced content. So And there's still an awful lot. I mean, our numbers are very different from Nielsen's in terms of what percent of, use the RIAA numbers, right, which was at the end of the year was about 30 million. So that's about 15% of the internet using population. And we haven't even scratched the surface in terms of the number of people who are subscribing yet. So I'm a little more optimistic for Spotify, but I agree I'm with David on Amazon. It kind of mystifies me a bit.
Yeah, and that said, though, a good point about the opportunity to trade people up to premium subscriptions. One question we ask is, what's the likelihood of you paying or upgrading your free service to paid in the next 6 months? And it's a very small percentage of people that say, yes, I'm looking or willing to pay more for a subscription. Only 11% for Gen Pop. I'm sure that goes down a little bit for millennials, but it's a hard sell for people that are that dug in on the freemium.
Yeah, I mean, to John's point, there's no question that when we, we sit here and we hear the experts or the writers talk about, well, it's going to be just like CD days. Well, in CD days, there were probably, 175, 200 million CD buyers in the U.S. And no matter how you do the math, we're never going to get back to 180, 200 million. But I think that we can still, and it's going to be a slower growth. I think we could still go from the RIAA, it was 30, it's probably now 40 at this point in the year. I think realistically you could double the number of paid subscribers in the U.S. We could be at 80 or 90 million. So
I think so, and I believe that media's forecasts for subscription are solid. But we do think that a lot of the growth comes in outside of the U.S. and Europe. But again, though, that the CD buy. Remember the CD buying or album buying back in the day was 60% of Americans didn't pay anything for music, and then most people would buy 2 or 3 albums a year, and sometimes as a present, right? And then there was this small concentration of 15% of the people that were, real music fans who spent over $100 a year on music, and those were the early converts to the streaming services. But the latest streaming users don't come out of that pot, so they are younger. And they feel like they're more comfortable spending money on content that's on a phone than they were. So it's a behavior that we may have grown out of, and it's a more of a generational thing than an age-based thing. So I think there's healthy growth in the industry, even in the semi-saturated markets. But I do think we might need a lower price point.
Yeah, and it's not just spending on music, physical versus digital. It's live events, it's merchandise, it's anything music related. They're more likely, the paid subscribers are more likely to spend more money on music, things around music in general.
So the top line subscription price for mainstream subscription services is $9.99. When you factor in things like free trials and discounts and bundling, how much are they actually taking in on average per subscriber?
I think Spotify actually does give that number, and I don't remember what it is, but it's like $6, I think, an active user or something like that.
per month.
Yeah.
I think the RIAA uses a number, something like $90 annual for give or take, somewhere around there.
How can rights holders, many of whom are in this audience, verify the royalty payouts that they get from the services? They get pretty voluminous accountings of micro pennies. How do they know that they're getting paid properly?
I mean, I'll leave that because that's my clients do it day in and day out. I mean, they're using, obviously the data directly from the DSPs, but using Nielsen data to validate that in terms of, okay, this is looking right in terms of the number of streams that this track has received, link that up to the work and understand, am I getting paid properly on this? So it's really about just having efficient systems internally on forecasting your business, tracking down the number of performances, number of streams, and identifying, what that can look like in terms of revenue, 3 months, 6 months down the road when you get paid out, and just using, having a good solid gap reporting system to understand, here's what my royalty statements are telling me, here's where I'm seeing some gaps in terms of the actual streaming performance or radio performances of my tracks.
So that tells you about usage, but what about, I mean, the royalties are calculated based on formulas. So how do you know that the underlying numbers that they're putting into the formula for revenue, et cetera, short of doing an audit, is accurate? Is there any way to know?
I mean, it's a combination of using historicals to create blended averages and ballparking it, but you know, some publishers are a little closer than others in terms of their modeling. But yeah, sometimes it's a little bit of a black box in terms of how these things are calculated and paid out.
I mean, in theory, everything can actually be tracked for once, but in practice, it's a lot of numbers, a lot of data.
Have we already reached peak streaming?
Well, I think we both the gang was all saying that we still see growth there, but there is a at the business level it is now, at the premium subscription level. But remember that, and I will stand behind what I said previously on that front. But then there's a lot of ad-supported or free streaming going on, and even that isn't 100% penetration because it's mostly younger people doing it. So it hasn't been a radio replacement, an over-the-terrestrial radio replacement yet, and I think that's the next battle. That's the next thing we think about is streaming going to actually replace the format of terrestrial radio, or is it actually maybe not even so much the format as the players who are involved who are doing it, because they can deliver a mix of curated playlists. Is that the new radio station or radio channel, or is that the new album? It's worth thinking about that.
Yeah, it's a complicated question because especially if you have researchers up here, we complicate everything. I mean, if you're talking about the streaming audience, we're getting, in the US anyway, we're getting close, and I would suspect this is happening in the developing countries. In developed countries, we're getting close to 80% streaming penetration, which means the only people, I will tell you, I think 2/3 of the people who don't stream are 55 years and older and very light music people. They don't go to shows. They listen to AM, FM, and CDs. So the streaming population isn't going to grow. What can grow is the proportion that pays. What can grow is the number of hours, as to David's point, as streaming starts to replace other formats, listening to downloads, listening to CDs, listening to AM, FM. So the amount of engagement will grow. And as a result, the revenue itself will grow. If you have more people paying or you have more people watching ads, filtering into sound exchange. So at a gross level, yes, we've reached peak streaming. Everybody who's streaming is probably going to, we're there. But at a micro level, hardly, I think we're beyond scratch and surface, but there's still a lot of growth potential. And, I'm going to jump ahead to one thing. The average age of the car in the United States is 12 years old. Most of the cars that we drive still have CD players. They still have old school, the car I drove most of the time is a 2010 Volvo, right? Unless I take a cord and attach my phone I'm not doing that if I'm just running out for bread. I listen to AM, FM radio. I admit it. But I have another car that I drive on the weekends, a little fun car with a stick shift. As soon as I start the car, it's playing Spotify because that was what was playing in the house. And it recognizes my radio, it recognizes my phone, and bam, it's playing the same thing, it's picked up my playlist. So as that starts to change, as the vehicle inventory changes in the US, you're going to see a massive change in what the landscape looks like in terms of listening.
And then throw smart speakers into that category too, right?
Well, before smart speakers, just to echo Russ's point, and this goes into smart speakers as well, looking at the amount of time you spend in home and in the car is almost 70% of your life, basically, in terms of music listening. 44% of your time music listening is in the home, another 30% is in the car. So that seamless transition from home to car, from work to car, whatever it may be, I think that is kind of the key to maintain that engagement and just, again, the easy button. So.
We jumped ahead a little bit, but I think it's actually, no, I think it's a good thing because you're talking about audiences in the car, and you've got streaming audience in the car, and you have terrestrial radio audience in the car. So let's talk about those and what's the dichotomy, and do you see a transition from terrestrial to streaming?
I'll give you two stats. We did a study last year on music in the car. If you look at the general population of people who listen to music in the car, either as driver or passenger, AM/FM radio has a 3-to-1 advantage in terms of audience, and probably 50% of the listening share goes to AM/FM, right? A little bit to streaming, a little bit to CDs. If you take a look at somebody who is streaming in their car, it flips. Almost 55% of what they listen to is streaming, right? So if that's the bellwether for what's going to happen as we change our vehicle inventory or as the technology gets better and easier, you know, that's a couple of years from now, that's what we'll be looking at in terms of music listening.
And then another way of looking at that with media research surveys would suggest that over half of regular radio listeners are over 45, and yet less than a third of streamers are. So, we will have older audiences. They'll be growing up into it, but we'll also have some older audience conversion. But we'll also have the streaming percentage of the youth will grow up, kind of thing. So, teens already are more likely to stream than listen to the radio regularly. So I think we're seeing that transition.
80% of radio AM/FM music listeners, not news, traffic, and sports and talk and Rush Limbaugh, 80% of AM/FM music listeners are also streaming. So again, think of my own situation when I go from that 8-year-old Volvo with needs a cord and a this and a to the newer car where it just works automatically. What's going to happen to that 80%? You think they'll still be listening to K-Rock, or will they be listening to, Spotify or whatever flavor? I think the latter.
So what about non-streaming formats? They're still a third of the market. So do you see a steady wind down, or do you see it hitting a precipitous decline at some point?
Certainly in digital, if you're counting that, digital downloads, that's taken the biggest hit, and but physical, it's declining, but not as significantly as digital. So there's still that, that presence in the market. If I like to have something I can touch and feel and put on my shelf, that sort of thing. So even though physical is down about 16% year over year, vinyl and cassettes are up. Vinyl's up 9%. I think it's about 5 years of consistent growth. So I mean, there's still opportunities there. It's just becoming a much smaller percent of the market.
Is there anybody from the Wall Street Journal or New York Times or a reporter here? What?
Anyone here from?
Anyone from the? Okay, then I'll say it. Digital downloads is a dead format, right? I mean, let's just put a nail into it, because if you think about why it was popular, you had this portable device that you could load all these things into, listen to whatever you want, create playlists. There's this thing called streaming that does exactly the same thing. I think it's going to rapidly be it's going the way of 8 tracks.
Actually, has Apple made an announcement about that yet, about downloads?
There's, you hear rumors that it's 1 more year, but then again, I heard, we heard the same thing about CDs a decade ago. So I don't think Apple's announced anything, and they may keep the store open for a while, but the customers are evaporating rapidly.
So let's talk about the smart in-home devices, the Alexas in the world. What impact is that having on streaming?
Training the new generation, training the new generation to just blurt things out and have it play.
Streaming audio on a smart speaker is a pretty good experience, sound quality aside. But it's enabling. It'll help Amazon in some places right now, and there's a reason why even Facebook had made some noise about having an in-home device. So I think we're going to get the platforms in place, and then the new business models take off. That's kind of classically what happens. You remember when you had, my favorite example of that is VCRs. So when you had VCR home. You remember what a VCR was? A tape?
Look at your eye.
Yeah. So when VCRs reached about 15 or 20% of U.S. household penetration, Blockbuster was invented. Now, Blockbuster's not no longer with us, but it became a new business. So the thing had been invented to do, to tape shows, and then it became primarily a distribution channel for movie rentals, right, and TV show rentals. So we're at that point in the US with home smart device penetration. We're at that 15 to 20%. So look for some exciting business models to rise out of it, and I think it'll fuel music and quite a bit.
Believe it or not, it looks like we have about 5 minutes left already, and there are some things that we didn't even get to, but I'm going to open the floor to questions. Yes.
You mentioned a bunch of the players in entertainment, and as players in streaming right now, whether it's Apple and Amazon and all of that, one company that has enormous market penetration on a subscriber-based model of content and who has not been named at any point in terms of music is Netflix.
Right.
Okay, and the question I've asked myself is, with all of their market share and all their penetration and all of their platform and all of their subscriber base, are they just laying in wait, or have they simply said, you know what, we're just not going to swim in that water, it's too saturated a market, it's not working?
It would be a good customer acquisition story, right? Because they're already placed, people love the brand, and there's bundling deals already, right? And that feels like more the logical route to go. Netflix is going to have its job cut out with it competing in filmed entertainment, because there will be more entrants there because the pie is much bigger. And they're spending, you have to spend billions of dollars in content creation to differentiate yourself. At least that's the theory in that model right now. So I think they'd be distracted by music, but they could well be a distribution channel for.
Or do they buy someone?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Why can't there be just complete transparency with respect to streaming data? Like why, I mean, are music publishers or rights holders in the position to mandate that we just want to see it? Well, why is that in any black box anymore?
Yeah, I have that conversation daily with my clients. There's not an easy answer. It's very political. There's this almost like Pandora's box kind of thing where I feel like the DSPs are a little afraid to give that visibility because like they're afraid of the power of the data and things like that. So it's tricky, but I wish I had a better answer. But until we get further along, and maybe the Music Modernization Act will improve things. Let people let down their guard a little bit more. But yeah, I truly believe in transparency is the way to go. I think we'll get there. It'll take a few years though.
More questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit to direct license deals that Spotify are trying to do now with the artists, and how you think that may impact the market?
Yeah, the question is about Spotify's direct deals with artists, and I think that what we're seeing, all the companies I mentioned, right, Amazon and Spotify and maybe even Facebook, but definitely Google and companies like that, might have aspirations, Netflix-like aspirations in the music world, where they might want to be a full stack music company, playing the role of a publisher as well as a label, as well as A&R, as well as marketing and promotion. I feel like a lot of their skills would be in the marketing and promotion angle rather than A&R, for instance. But there's everybody at any of the technology companies is trying to figure out how to create hits, how to identify, how to use the magic of the algorithm to figure out what the next hit would be. And that's art, or at least half art. If you look at Netflix, for instance, they say they were the ones that started everybody thinking about, you can produce stuff because you know what everybody watches. And there was a great interview with Netflix the other day where they said it's 70 gut, 30 math. And so I don't think the math skills will help the platform companies that much in that space.
More questions? I have one. Let's, the more distant future, we didn't really get around to talking about AR and VR, but that might be a good way to close out. Gentlemen?
It's potentially a good licensing business, right? And it could even be a catalog licensing business. And by the way, the catalog trends in streaming are much the same as they are in radio, basically, that most of what gets played is 2 years old or 3 years old at most. But this idea that you could create these new products where, with synchronization to AR or VR, whether that's looking through your phone and seeing a city guide that plays music in the background when you're walking around the East Village, and it plays music in the background from the 70s and 80s and CBGB and all that good stuff. That could be something. That could be a cool new thing. I think the VR, virtual reality as opposed to augmented reality, is probably, it's a gaming-like business initially. I'm not sure it's it's going to be years before that's even as big as the traditional gaming business. So treat it as another stream potentially, but it would be much like gaming, I think.
I mean, I know investments are being made in this area on the publishing side. I won't say who's doing that, but it's certainly an area they see opportunity from a licensing standpoint, whether it be live concert footage or behind the scenes access, things like that. But I think we're going to see some interesting things to come over the next several years.
Yeah, and I definitely think that since it's beyond the statutory realm, it's going to be a lot of licensing of many different components. So the industry's going to have to figure that out. All right. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.